Everything is as it should be. God's love is perfect. We release this treatment to that perfect law, knowing so certainly it is done, that we say together, and so it is. Okay, everyone, so we're going to pick up now with more or less, because the 4 chapters, the introduction to the textbook, kind of overlap. So more or less, we're going to talk about the ideas that are in the 2nd chapter to the introduction of the Science of Mind textbook. And that chapter is titled, The Way It Works. It with a capital I. It being this thing that we talked about last week. Excuse me. Now, Dr. Holmes used the term thing, the thing itself. And he used it not in a disrespectful manner, but in a manner that would cause us to think. You see, we use words all the time, and you hear me talk about this through the year. You know, what does a word mean? What do we really mean when we use a particular word? And God is one of those words that if there's 100 people in the audience and I use the word God, there's 110 different definitions of what I just said. It means something different to everybody. And while it doesn't really matter to the divine what term we choose to call it, what name we choose to give it, it makes all the difference to us, because our concept of the divine sets the course of our life. So Dr. Holmes starts off and he uses the word the thing itself. And now he brings us again, he says how it works, not how God works, not how the divine works, how it works. And again, that is to poke us with a stick, a curiosity stick, to kind of poke us and say, well, what does he mean by that? And why does he call it it? Why doesn't he say how God works? Why doesn't he say how the divine works? Why did he choose that? So I invite you to open your minds with curiosity and start to really explore the choice of words, the way the ideas are laid out, the way they unfold in the textbook. Now, these first 4 chapters to the introduction of the Science of Mind are the way Dr. Ernest Holmes restated the ideas in Thomas Troar's book around 1919. So Dr. Holmes took Troar's work, the creative process in the individual, and he restated it in his own words in these first 4 chapters to the introduction of the textbook, the Science of Mind textbook. So Troar's premise was very simple. There's this thing that we call God, and it has a creative process, and it has created us out of itself. We are in its image and likeness because we are part of it. It is expressing its life as us. And that creative process is within us as well. The way that the divine creates is a way that the human being can create if we understand how it works. So Dr. Holmes told us that if there's a way that a thing works, I'm sorry, let me back up. He said if a thing works, there's a way in which it works. And anyone who will take the time to understand how it works can work with it. Anyone who will take the time to understand how it works can work with it. The example I gave in the email last night was learning how to drive a car. You know, there's a way that cars work. You have a steering wheel, you have a gas pedal, you have a brake pedal, and some cars you have a clutch pedal and a gear shift. That's pretty much it. You know, you got a couple mirrors and radio and you're good to go. Anyone who will take the time to learn how a car works can learn how to drive. Anyone. Doesn't matter what age, it doesn't matter what religion, it doesn't matter what country they're from. Anyone who will take the time to learn how to drive a car, how a car works, learns how to drive a car, they'll be able to do so. See? It's just that simple. When I was learning how to fly many years ago, I read several different books on the art of flying airplanes, and one of them just struck me and it said, you know, anybody can learn how to fly an airplane reasonably well in a short period of time. And that's true. In those days, it only took like 20 hours of instruction and some ground school before you were cleared to solo an airplane, fly by yourself. And 20 hours of practice is, not a tremendous amount of time. It's half a week, half of a work week. But the book went on to say, however, it then takes a lifetime to perfect. A lifetime to perfect. And I mention that because, yes, in a short amount of time, anybody who reasonably applies themselves can learn how to do it. But each and every time you do it, each and every time you go out to fly your plane, you hopefully get a little bit better. You get a little bit more skilled, you get a little bit more proficient. And if you don't go out and fly your plane, I had to go out and fly at least once a month, because if I didn't go out and fly at least once a month, skills are perishable. Right? So if I waited 2 months to go out, when I got in the cockpit and took off, I wasn't as good as I was the last time I landed. I lost something along the way. So I had to do it on a regular basis. But doing it on a regular basis, I could get better and better and better. See? And the same thing applies with what we were talking about here in the Science of Mind textbook, in this working with this creative process. If the thing works, if there is a creative process, then there's a way in which it works. And anyone who will take the time to discover that way, to apply themselves to it, can work with it, And I would add to that, must be consistent and will continuously, forever and ever, be getting better at working with it. So in these 4 chapters to the Introduction to the Science of Mind textbook, Dr. Holmes is kind of laying out the creative process for us. There is a creative process in the universe. We can work with it. The basic premise, that's where we want to start. But then we must ask ourselves, so what? So what? There's a creative process in the universe. What do I care? So what? Excuse me. I'm going to get a drink of water here. I have a little bit of trouble again with my sinuses this morning. Well, I would answer the question, so what, in 2 ways. Now, the first way is the very practical or pragmatic way. If we live in a universe that is abundant, remember I said last week, Dr. Holmes says there are more stars in the sky than we can count. There are more grains of sand in a handful of the beach than we can count. There's more power in the universe than we would possibly be able to use or comprehend. And yet we find ourselves weak, tired, and afraid. Why is that so? And the reason for that is we believe we are separated from all of that. We don't identify with that. It's out there, we're over here. But from a practical point of view, and I think this is why Dr. Holmes laid the teaching out the way he did. From a practical point of view, each of us, almost every day, each of us wants to experience something differently in our lives. Sometimes we want more of something. We want more money. We want more opportunity. We want more of something. Sometimes we want to be able to express ourselves more fully. We want to be able to creatively express. We want to be able to sing and to dance and to paint and to just express life beautifully. Sometimes we want a greater experience of love in our lives. Significant others to come into our lives that we can grow with, that we can share life with, All of these different things that go with day-to-day living. And we have grown up in a world that teaches us how to do that with our intellect and our willpower. And now what Dr. Holmes is telling us is, but if there's this creative process in the universe, and if you learn how to work with it, you can cooperate with it. If you learn how it works, then we should be able to use that creative process in order to help us to live a more fulfilling life, right? Not a life full of more stuff. This is where people sometimes get confused. Well, look, I can have that red Porsche sitting in the driveway. Sure you can, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about feeding your soul, feeding your soul. Now, I think this is very important because if you look at the world we live in, it seems that we have more stuff than any generation that went before us, you know. I mean, it's just amazing. The Amazon guy just keeps coming to the door and bringing it. But is our generation, is our current society more fulfilled, spiritually fulfilled, experiencing the presence of God, experiencing the love of God? Are we experiencing that more fully than ever before? And I would say probably not, because people seem, and it may be in my role, you know, when people come to me, but people seem to be, there's something missing. Remember the Peggy Lee song, if that's all there is, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze. Let's have a ball. There's something missing. There's an emptiness there, see? So this is not about, I think it was, Joel Goldsmith who said we kind of, along the way, we kind of got confused and thought God was a servant, and we could say, well, bring me more money and bring me more cars and bring me more food and bring me more this. And we lose sight of what it's all about, see. This is about becoming closer in our consciousness, becoming closer to the very experience, the very presence of the divine. Who am I that thou art mindful of me, is what St. Paul said. So from a very practical point of view, let's say, for example, you're going to work today and there's a problem that needs to be solved. And you know that because it was there when you left work the last day. You know, there's this issue. You know you're going to go to work today, and you know there's an issue, and this issue has to be solved, you know. And you can go in and you can say, well, you know, I'm in this job, I'm qualified for this job, there's got to be a way to solve it, I'm going to figure this out. And that may all very well be true. But there's another way that can work with that can help with that. If we stop and recognize that the intelligence that created the universe is right here where I am, it is expressing itself as me and through me, then everything that can be known is right where I am. And somehow, all I have to do somehow is accept that, is to make myself available to it. So we can start our day with spiritual practice. We can start our day with a spiritual mind treatment. We can start by knowing that God already knows everything there is to know, the divine, whatever term you want to call it. Some people, the word God or the word Father, and all these different things that cultures have tried to use to express. I love from the Hindu, we get the phrase, O ineffable one, O ineffable one. So here we might start a prayer and say, Our Father who art in heaven. In India they might say, O ineffable one, the one who is beyond any idea of words, O ineffable one. See? So we can start by saying the ineffable one knows all that there is to know. And the ineffable one is omnipresence, is all presence. Omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. It knows what needs to be known. Right where I am, this is. So now I can accept, see, now I'm taking you through the steps of a treatment. So now I can accept that whatever I need to know today to deal with this issue, because there's no problems in the mind of God, whatever I need today, whatever needs to come through me, whatever inspiration needs to come through me this day in order to resolve this issue, I joyfully accept. I joyfully accept. And then we go through the remaining steps of the treatment. We give thanks that it is done, and we release it and let it go. And then the creative process of the universe itself can work with us and work through us to reveal to us, to lead us where we need to go. I mean, it could be as simple. I'm giving you, practical examples of what has happened in my life. It could be as simple as I open a desk drawer and find a piece of paper that had fallen back there months ago that has the answer to my problem. Well, that could be a coincidence. It could be that a coworker walks into my office. This actually happened to me one day, and drops a whole stack of PowerPoint charts on my desk and says, I was thinking about something over the weekend, and it falls into your shop, but this was a guy I had replaced. He moved to another department. He says, but I put a few ideas down for you, and this might help you someday. It's yours. And it was exactly what I needed. Exactly. I didn't have to make up any charts. I just took his charts to my meeting and threw them up on the wall. It was just so perfect. Or it may be a flash of inspiration. I've been standing in the line at the cafeteria waiting to pay for my sandwich, and all of a sudden, an answer to a problem just suddenly appeared to me. I had to grab a piece of paper and start writing down so I wouldn't forget. Start writing down quickly. My point is that we go through life, and we've learned to go through this life based on our ego, based on our intellect, based on our training, and based on our skills. But there's an entire creative process in the universe that is available to us if we will learn how to work with it. So let's back up a little bit. Let's stop and say, well, if we accept the fact, if we believe that there is this thing, this whatever you want to call it, there is this something, there is this creator, right? And remember I said, William James said, nobody's kind of looked across religions as a scientist might and said, what's common about religions? What's different about religions? It's very important. I once got, when we were in ministerial training, I once got interested in understanding more about Egyptian religion, because some of the authors we were reading, Emma Curtis Hopkins in particular, refers back a lot to Egyptian mythology. And I said, I really don't know anything, or at the time really didn't know anything about Egyptian religion. I grew up and I went to parochial school for 12 years, and I was raised in that religion and taught everything that the teachers thought I needed to know about that religion, but I didn't know anything about any others, particularly one from thousands of years ago. So I went to the library and I checked out a book on Egyptian religion. Excuse me, I'm getting more water. Maybe I checked out 2 or 3, I usually do. And I went back home and I opened them up, and I was greatly disappointed because I didn't learn anything at all about the experience, the daily experience. How would an adherent to this religion, what would their day be like? How does growing up in that religion impact somebody's daily life? And it wasn't there. Instead, they gave almost a catalog of gods. They said, well, there was this god for rain, and there was this god for fire, and there was this god for sunshine. And didn't tell me anything at all, really, about the Egyptian religion. I often relate it to, in the Catholic Church, we had a little book that we had in our catechism class, and it was the Communion of Saints, and it would tell you every day. You could open this book up, and for example, it would tell you today what saint the feast day is, and it would give you a little biography about that saint. Now, reading through that daily Communion of Saints, it doesn't really tell you what it's like to grow up Catholic. It just tells you something about the life of the saints. So my point is, when we try to use the intellect to turn and analyze religions, the intellect likes to categorize things. It likes to divide things and put them into pigeonholes. And in so doing, I think it misses out on some of the key The key elements. So if we look, right, if we look at religions and philosophies, if you will, in which there is a creator, and there are religions, there not religions, but there are philosophies in which there is not a creator. But if we look at the religions in which there's a creator, what we find is that we are here through a deliberate act of the creator, a conscious, deliberate act. In the book of Genesis, we're told in the beginning, there was void, there was chaos, there was confusion. And God said, let there be. And there was, you see. And if we go to other cultures, we find similar ideas. That the creative process, maybe I need to back that up a little bit. This creative process started with an act of will or volition of a conscious creator. Now I want you to think of a circle, and mentally draw a circle, a nice big circle, and then draw two horizontal lines across that circle, dividing it evenly into thirds. So you have a top third, a middle third, and a bottom third. These are the metaphysical charts in the back of the Science of Mind textbook. The 1926 version of the textbook was a series of lessons based on those charts. And that 1926 version is available in PDF format. It's out in the public domain. If you search the internet for it, you'll find it. Just search for Science of Mind 1926 text and it'll pop up someplace. But if we think of this top third of the circle, right, we want to think of that as will, volition, choice, decision. Right? And in terms of the divine, we want to think of that as spirit. Spirit. If you want to take this over into Christianity, this would be the Father. Whatever this thing that we call the divine, whatever this thing that we call God, whatever this thing that we call the Creator is, there's a part of it that knows and chooses and decides. And this is represented to us in the book of Genesis. God said, let there be. So God decided, if you want to take that, if you want to take that literally or you want to take it as a metaphor, God decided that there would be light and said, let there be light. And just an aside, is the light in the first act of creation is enlightenment, is awareness, is consciousness. See? And this is why the sun didn't come until a couple days later. But the point is that there is will, there is volition, there is choice, there is decision, and then there's declaration. Let there be. This is the top third of the circle. So then we have to speculate, right? Because we don't know. This is why Holmes said we're walking hand in hand from the visible into the invisible. We have to say, well, the divine spirit, it doesn't have arms and legs and hands and feet and vocal cords like we do. So how did it speak? How did it speak its word? And we come to the hypothesis, if you want to call it that, well, it was a mental act. It was an act of thought. It was an act of will. It was an act of volition. The Creator thought, let there be. And then there was, you see, and then there was. Well, what made it so? What made it so? It doesn't have arms and legs and hands and feet, hammers and nails and those sorts of things. So what made it so? And this is where we come to the middle part, the middle stripe of the circle. And this is what Dr. Holmes would call the law the law of mind, the thing that makes it so. In Christianity, it would be the Holy Spirit, the doer of the word, right? So Spirit speaks the word, and then something acts upon that word. Something is the doer of the word. Dr. Holmes also calls it subjective mind. Subjective mind. Subjective because it doesn't decide on its own what it will create, but it takes direction from the objective, the top third of the circle, the will, the volition. It takes its direction from that. So, Spirit says, let there be, and then the subjective, the law of mind, the doer of the word, makes it so. Now, this doer of the word is intelligent. It knows how to do what needs to be done. But it does not change the direction that it was given. It brings about the circumstances that are the exact outpicturing of what it was told to do. And the example we use to illustrate this is the soil and the seed. So we go down to the garden center, you and I, we go down to the garden center, we decide we're going to have a vegetable garden this year. Getting some more water here. We decide we're going to get a vegetable garden this year. So we get our soil ready, we till our soil, we add fertilizer, we add compost, we get the soil all ready to go. And when it comes planting time, we go down to the farmer's supply down the road here. They have little bins there with every kind of seed you could imagine, and a little scoop you put in there. This is for not these little packets that you buy at the hardware store, but this is for people who actually put in big gardens. So you go there and you say, you know what? I'm going to grow tomatoes this year. So you go over to that little bin and you go and you get yourself a little paper bag, you put some tomato seeds in there. You take a pen and you write tomato on them. And you take them up to the front and they weigh them up for you. And you take your tomato seeds home. So now you come home, and of course these days you can go on the internet and it tells you how deep and how wide apart your rows need to be, how deep, how far apart in the row to put your seeds, and you go ahead and you plant them. You cover them over with dirt and you sprinkle a little bit of water on them. At that point, you see, you have used your willpower. That's your power to choose, not your power to mentally coerce something, right? This is important. We don't use our willpower to force anything to happen. We use our will to decide what would happen. Then we turn it over to the subjective. We turn it over to the law. We turn it over to the creative soil of the universe. So we put our seeds in the ground, and the soil and the sun and the rain and all of nature knows exactly what to do. There's an intelligence in that seed. There's an intelligence, if you will, in the soil, a chemical intelligence at very least. There's the heat, the sunshine. When everything gets to be exactly right, the right condition for that seed to sprout, something changes within it. It sprouts, it grows, It's just amazing. I don't know if you were, when you were kids, if you ever put beans. We used to take a little mason jar and a piece of desk blotter. You remember when desks had blotters on them? So they absorb the ink that we spilled as kids. So we put a piece of blotter into the jar and put a little bit of water down at the bottom, and the blotter would, of course, soak it all up. And then we would put bean seeds around the perimeter. So the blotter kind of pushed the bean seeds against the glass so we could watch them. We put them by the windowsill. And you could watch, and after a few days, the bean would sprout. And little roots would come down, and they would kind of head down into the water, and then a little sprout would come up, and it would be going up to the top of the jar so it could head up to the sunlight. We were fascinated by this as kids, you know. We would take the bean out and turn it upside down so the roots were sticking up and the shoot was going down. And in a couple of days, it had the roots made a U-turn and were going towards the bottom, and the sprout made a U-turn and was going up to the top. There was something intelligent at work there, see? So there's an intelligence that knows what to do, exactly how to do it, but that intelligence never says, oh, okay, Jim, you planted tomatoes, but you know what? I don't think I'm going to give you tomatoes this year. Tomatoes cause you heartburn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some lettuce instead. Some nice bland lettuce. The soil cannot do that. It cannot change what you planted in there. You planted the seed for tomatoes, and it's going to give you tomatoes. So this is what Dr. Holmes is telling us then about the creative process of the universe. Right? We start with the will, the volition, the choice of the creator. That directive is turned over to the subjective, the mind, the creative force, the law of mind, the doer of the word, whatever you want to call it, the middle of the circle. And then you have the actual physical demonstration, the outpicturing, if you want to call it that, of the equivalent of what that directive was. I decide I want tomatoes. I put tomato seeds in the ground. The soil blindly produces tomato seeds. It doesn't argue with me, doesn't say, no, you can't have tomatoes. If I told it I wanted tomatoes, it gave me tomatoes. And then boom, the third part of the circle, the bottom part of the circle, is the tomato, the physical appearance of the thing. The thing that the mental equivalent was the decision, then the physical thing is here, the tomato. And that, again, we could say would be the Father, the Holy Ghost, or the Holy Spirit, the doer of the word, and the Son, the physical manifestation, the physical presence, the physical manifestation of this creative power. So this is the way that we want to start thinking about that. And then we would say, well, yeah, that's wonderful philosophy, but how would I know? You see, how would I know if that's true? Excuse me again. The people on the bridge, I'm getting more water. I mean, we can sit and speculate all day long about things that we could never prove, right? But Dr. Holmes says we should explore this as a science. Now, how would a scientist explore things? Well, scientists come up with a hypothesis, and then they come up with experiments. They come up with ways to test, you know. When I was studying electronics, we were given a theory of the way electricity flows in a circuit. And then we actually built little circuits on a breadboard chassis. And then the theory would say, well, if you add more resistance to the circuit, the light will glow dimmer. Well, okay. So we solder more resistance into the circuit, and sure enough, the light would glow dimmer. If you construct the circuit a different way, the current will flow a different way. Well, how would we do that? Well, we construct it a different way, and then we use our meters to measure the current flowing in the different branches of the circuit. We started with a hypothesis, and then we developed a means of testing that. See, this is what science would do. And what Dr. Holmes is telling us is that we should be quite willing to put these ideas to the test. Not just satisfied to read about them, not just satisfied to read about somebody else's progress or somebody else's experience, but to actually put them to the test. As I said, we have a problem to solve at work today. Can we stop for a few minutes in the morning? Can we identify with with the fact, can we realize that omniscience already knows. Omniscience is omnipresence where I am. And I accept it. See, I accept it. This is an important step. I accept it. Can we let it come through? Can we let it come through? Can we see? When we first started out many years ago in our first year classes, we used to keep a little diary, a little journal. This is what I got up this morning and said in my spiritual practice. This is what happened to me during the day. Excuse me. One church I went to called them WIN, W-I-N, WIN circles, where people would get together and they talk about all the wonderful things that happened during the week. Paying attention to what they're paying attention to, you see. Thinking about what they're thinking about. So here's the issue. Here's what we have to consider. We're walking hand in hand from the visible to the invisible. Now, as I said last week, the physicists will tell us that there was the Big Bang. There was the time when everything was condensed into a tiny, tiny point. And then there was a Big Bang. Something kicked the can and it started to expand and it became the universe, or universes as we know them today. And this is a theory, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's a theory. And you would say, well, how would you prove that? And they could say, well, we can measure how fast things are moving out. We can use our telescopes. We can hear background radiation and all kinds of things that I don't understand because I don't have the scientific background to understand them. But they're constantly checking. They're constantly checking on their theories. Excuse me. Einstein developed the theory of relativity. And scientists are constantly conducting experiments trying to see if that theory holds true in all cases. Now they're starting to come up with an idea that maybe Einstein's idea of dark matter, maybe there's a different explanation for that. See? Einstein assumed that gravity was a constant in the universe. Now they're saying, well, maybe gravity is weaker or stronger at different places. So maybe dark matter isn't really there. They're not putting Einstein down. They're building on his knowledge, you see. They're testing it. They're constantly testing it. And that's what Dr. Holmes is asking us to do. Let me pause for just a second here. So we can't go back past, in physics, we can't go back past the Big Bang. Because if you ask a scientist what was it like the moment before the Big Bang, they would say, we can't tell you because every way that we have to weigh, to measure, to touch things did not exist at that moment in time. All they can tell us is it was a singularity and something kicked the can. That's it. That's where we cross from the visible into the invisible. We can speculate that it's there. We can't prove it because there would be no way. There would be no way. Same sort of problem exists if we approach the topic from the point of view of religion. How could we prove that God is there? How can we prove that these things that I said about the creative process are true? And here's where we realize that we can't prove it out there. We can't go out there, no more than a physicist can go past the Big Bang. But we have to prove it in here. This is where Troward said the creative process in the individual, in the individual. If this creative process exists, as I described it, if it created us out of itself, in its image and likeness, as scriptures tell us, then that creative process is within us as well. You and I have an objective mind. We have will, we have volition, we can choose, we can decide. And we also know that we have what's called a subjective mind. If you've ever been hypnotized or seen an exhibition, not a stage show, but medical exhibition of hypnosis, you can see that there's a part of us that takes direction and makes it so. And I mean direction that says, don't feel any pain. You won't feel any pain. And people don't. They don't feel pain because the hypnotist has told them so. I saw a demonstration by one doctor who had a nurse in the hospital that he had been working with for years, and he said that he believed he could perform surgery on her, take her gallbladder out without any anesthesia because she was such a good subject. So we know that there's part of us that has objective mind. We know that there's part of us that has a subjective mind. And you say, well, that's well and good, but does that produce physical changes? And you've heard me use the example over and over. If somebody's about to give a speech, you saw this on Little Rascals, somebody's about to give a speech, and someone sits in the front row of the audience and starts sucking on a lemon, it's hard. It's hard for that person to talk because their mouth starts to pucker when they see the lemon. If you hear something and it embarrasses you, your cheeks flush. Your embarrassed thought caused a physiological change in your body. So we have, before our eyes, we have the perfect laboratory. We have the perfect place to experiment. But we have to be willing to use it. See, we have to apply. We can't just read about it and talk about it. At some point, we have to start using it. So as I said earlier, the first benefit of using it is the pragmatic benefit of using it for whatever we need in life. When Lori and I were in our first year class back in Durham many years ago, there was a gentleman in the class who asked the minister, he said, well, I want a new car. Can this help me get a new car? And the minister said, yeah, why not? What's the difference between a car and a planet to the mind that can create all? Can you believe that the intelligence of the universe can bring that car to you or you to that car? He said, sure. So he got very specific. He said he wanted a red Volvo. It had to be between certain model years, had to have certain mileage on it, and he wanted it for a certain price range. So the teacher helped him, and he wrote out a treatment that this car was his now. And the next day, he was a carpenter, a handyman, and he drove around, he did different jobs, and he was in, we were living in Durham at the time, and he had to go up to Raleigh to do a job, and he wasn't familiar with Raleigh, and he got lost. Excuse me. And he went down a side street, which he didn't need to be on because he was lost. And there, sitting on somebody's lawn, was a red Volvo in the model year range that he wanted, in the price range that he wanted, with the amount of miles on it that he wanted. He got drawn to it. He said, well, it could be a coincidence, may have just happened. He had it on his mind that he wanted it, and he saw it. All these different things that we could use to explain it, and we need to look at those too. But if we do that over and over and over and over, and we consistently start to see changes in our lives because we are learning how to work with the creative process, see, then we know it's there. Then we know it's there. Then it's not just theory, it's not just speculation, it's not just nice to think about, but we put it to the test in here, in us, because we can't put it to the test out there. There is no out there. It's only in here. Now, the second benefit of using this, and that's where I'm going to close today, because next week we're going to go more into this process and what it does. But the second benefit, and the most important benefit, is for us to grow closer to the divine in our conscious realization of the presence and the activity of the divine in our lives, the mystical experience. You see, having a very practical way to do things is good because it keeps us coming back to do that. Oh, I can use that here, and oh, I can use that there, and oh, I can use that over here. That's all good. Right? Keeps us interested, keeps us busy, keeps us moving. But what it's doing is every time we do that spiritual practice, we are bringing ourselves in consciousness a little bit closer to God. Because as Dr. Holmes tells us, with all you're getting, you have to get God first. You have to bring yourself closer. So in the example I use with we want an answer to a specific problem, how did we start? We started by recognizing what God is. Omniscience, perfect wisdom, perfect intelligence. But then we took the next step and said, but where? But where is God? God is omnipresence, all presence. I'm presence. God is all presence. The presence that is me is the divine appearing as me. Not that I am God, but that the life that I have, the life that I live, is some part of the divine. I didn't create this life. My parents didn't create this life. Just because this little body started growing in my mother's womb didn't say, okay, God, create a new life and send it to Jim. We are all little sparks of the divine. So in our daily practice then, by deliberately, consciously, consistently using this creative process, we are bringing ourselves closer to God every day. Right? So just as learning how to fly an airplane, anybody with a little bit of training can learn how to do it reasonably well. It's the same thing with spiritual mind treatment. With a little bit of time, anybody with reasonable training who will put themselves into it can learn how to do it. But it's a lifetime of perfection. So I hope today, I trust if you have the textbook, you will go read the second chapter. Excuse me. And I hope today that you will consider, wow, we've started a new year together. We started with 365 days and 17 of those are already gone. Boom, where did they go? But every day, I can use this creative process, not only for myself, but for my loved ones, for people who ask me for help, for health, for wealth, for love, for creative self-expression, for spiritual attunement, the 5 key areas of life. But every day I can use it just a little bit more, see? And every day in so doing, I bring myself just a little bit closer to God. Now, this closeness is only in our consciousness, because physically we can't be separated from that which is all presence. But our consciousness thinks we are separated. And through our spiritual practice of spiritual mind treatment and of meditation, we remove that barrier in consciousness. And this is one way of doing it, a practical way, an easy way, a fun way of going through life. So this week, think about something you would like to have different in your life. And stop and think about, well, does God already have that? Does God already know that? See? Would God withhold that from me? We'll talk about that some more next week. Would God withhold that from me in any way? Can I accept it? See, the gifts have already been given. The gifts have already been given. But when we pray, we have to pray believing in our hearts, because that forces us to accept. We must accept. So this week, accept the good that has been given. Accept your responsibility for choosing the kind of life you will live. And get busy. If you've been using spiritual mind treatment as a